Imagine a typical day in your life. You wake up, get breakfast, go to work, go to the gym, get groceries, the usual, right? Now imagine that same day without a single ounce of music. Hard to imagine, right? Like, how do you not listen to music in any regular day? Well, that's the topic of my discussion today, music on my mind. Hi there, my name is Visale, and I'm a recent graduate from the University of Western Ontario with my degree in medical science and an honors in biochem. And today I'm choosing to talk about music and the effects of music on our brain because it's a really relevant field in research today. And it's something that applies to everyone because music is just so universal. Music is all around us. There's music we love and music we're not a fan of. And there's a song to describe about any situation and emotion there is that we experience. So how does music affect our brains? Well, to get into that, I'll have to talk about the different regions of the brains or the lobes of the brains. And in general, there's four different categories. You have the frontal lobe, which looks at memory and conscious processing, the parietal lobe that looks at sensory processing, the occipital lobe that looks at visual processing and mapping, and the temporal lobe that looks at verbal communication and emotional processing. And it's this temporal lobe that's responsible for the signals that are fired when you listen to music. So when you put those tunes in your ears, those signals are sent from the ear to the brain and are registered for processing. And to understand the nuances of music, such as the stylistic devices, those are signals that are sent from the temporal lobe to other regions, as well as the emotions that are associated. There's a different region for that. And within the temporal lobe, there's something called the auditory cortex. And the auditory cortex is sort of like a map of different frequencies. So when you listen to a song that's either high pitched or low pitched or varying pitches throughout the song, different signals are sent from your ear towards the auditory cortex. And depending on where it lies on the auditory cortex, a different signal is developed. And from there, it's sent to something called the reward pathway. And the reward pathway, which is highlighted on the screen, is responsible for our processing on how we interpret an event. For example, if it's something that we expect would be pleasurable or give us a good mood, then it would be rewarding. And so other parts of the brain are also involved through the signals that are sent from the ear. For example, stylistic devices, language, and tempos are interpreted by other regions of the brain, versus imaginations are associated with a specific region of the brain. So a lot is going on when you listen to music, which is why music is so stimulating. And in all of that, there's a molecule that's being released called dopamine. And dopamine is like your happy hormone, and it's basically what helps you register something as being pleasurable or rewarding. So when the reward pathway perceives a song that you're listening to as being happy or pleasurable, more dopamine is released, and you get something called a dopamine surge. And the amount of dopamine that's released will basically dictate your mood. The more, the merrier, right? And so when the amount of dopamine plateaus, for example, that means that you've been satiated and your brain wants more of it. So then you tend to listen to more happy songs and you listen to more of the same type. And that's what starts to develop your taste in music. In all of that, the frontal lobe is processing this as a conscious event, and you start to remember this as something pleasurable. And that's how you develop a memory for the types of music you like and develop your taste. And you tend to seek more songs of the like. So if the hardwiring in your brain is all the same, then how do we each have our different tastes? Well, that comes down to the age old nature versus nurture discussion, where whether it's your genetic predisposition or your societal upbringing that influences how you perceive something or how you prefer something over others. So, to begin that discussion, we'll talk about nature. And nature, like I said, is your genetic disposition. It's the hardwiring of DNA and the nuances of DNA that have been manipulated throughout your family line to prefer a certain type of music. For example, if you come from a family of jazz musicians, then the genes that are associated with certain tunes that prefer jazz notes would be hardwired in you. However, your social bringing also has an influence. So, the family that you grow up in, the type of music that they play, your social circle, your media influence, all of these influence how you listen to music on a day to day basis, and that will in turn develop your musical taste. So it's an interplay between what you're predisposed to versus what you grow up with that influence your music taste. And researchers found that social influences and nurture tends to have a greater influence during your lifetime because that tends to evolve as you meet new people, as you have new interactions. And so again, When all of this happens, you have an interplay of different interactions and different communications, and this develops into something called the age-old discussion of, does music make us a better person? Does music make us a more attentive, more motivated individual or student? And there are pros and cons to this discussion that researchers have developed, and I'll be discussing both here. So, in terms of pros, music is definitely something that lowers our pressure and lowers our stress levels, and that makes us a more attentive individual, and we tend to focus more and be motivated more to do the work that we have at hand. And in that case, music is definitely great when you're doing work as an additive. However, on the con side, music is also a distraction essentially. I mean, I'm pretty sure you've had experiences where you zone out and you're just listening to the music, living in the moment, and it makes you less attentive of your surroundings. So it actually poses as a distraction according to some researchers rather than a motivator. So in the eyes of researchers, there's a balance between the pros and cons, and it really comes down to the task at hand, and this is something that I've experienced as a student. For example, when I do math homework problems, it's easy for me to listen to music too and do work at the same time. But if I'm reading a book for English, it's not that easy. And so it depends on the task as well as the individual or the day. So, with that, I'd like to conclude my discussion on music on my mind, and I hope you learned something from this exploration. Thank you so much, Janik, for this opportunity, as well as everyone for tuning in today. I hope you had a great night and had an enjoying experience throughout these presentations. I hope to see you again in another event like this. Take care.